Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Raja Umar on my channel RU Speaks. Raja Umar speaks for you all for the subjects of Pakistan studies and global perspectives. And these days we are discussing the topics related to the history and culture of Pakistan, the component one, paper one of Pakistan studies. And last in the last lesson we talked about the religious thinkers. We discussed the role of Shah Waliullah, Sayyid Ahmed Shahid Barelvi, Haji Shariatullah, and Tito Mir over there. That how they tried their best for the sake of the revival of Islam in the subcontinent, and how their efforts were came up towards the purification of the Muslim society and bringing the Muslims towards the true spirit of Islam. So moving on, in the next century, I mean, this is whole of the events we are talking about from 1750 to 1850, when these thinkers were over there and they tried their level best to get the Muslims liberated, whether in Bengal against the tyranny of the Hindu landlords, or the oppressions by the British, or over here in Punjab through the to get rid of the tyranny of the Sikh government of Ranjit Singh and his followers. So this is how moving ahead now. That is, and the things eventually went into the War of Independence of 1857, and now the events which are related to this war, they are to be discussed over here in our today's topic. And we have the topic that War of Independence 1857. And whenever we move towards the British media or British articles or books, they call it a revolt. They declare it a rebellion. So it means that they take it in the negative words. But as this particular event was for the sake of bringing the Muslims back on track after losing a lot of ground in during the Mughal Empire, so we call it that we wanted to get independence from the you can say oppression of the British in the subcontinent at that time. So first of all, again, this was a greater issue. We will talk about the causes first over here. That what were the causes that the War of Independence broke out in 1857? So there were certain political, religious, and economic causes. First, why not to talk about the political causes of the breakout of the War of Independence? That is the introduction of doctrine of lapse in 1852, when the lands of the locals were grabbed by the British. With the help of this particular sort of law they imposed over here, and when they said that when some local Nawab or Amir had no legal heir to be the next Amir or Nawab of those lands would be confiscated by the British. What was that? So it means that this rule was really very much cruel. So that no, those lands, they should be given to the local people over there to look after and to rule. But they were taken over by the British. But in certain cases, those lands were even a Nawab or Amir had certain legal heir, still those lands were confiscated. It means that they even you can say got their own law manipulated for their own sake. There was the breach of law by themselves, that even an Amir or Nawab had the legal heir, still they were confiscating the lands. So this created a greater resentment among the people over there, or among the Nawabs and Amirs, those who were having the rule of those smaller states across the subcontinent. And you know that there were more than 460 small states over here in the subcontinent. So this led to the rebellion, that when the doctrine of lapse was it was a cruel sort of rule, but even it was further misused, that even having the legal heir, still those lands were confiscated. So that's why the local rulers, they went against this particular law, and they showed their sort of resentment, and they rose against the British. So disgrace to the Mughal emperor, that he was thrown out of that Red Fort of Delhi, and he was shifted to a small house over there in Delhi. So that was a disgrace. Disgrace to the Mughal emperor and the royal family by sending them to the Qutb Sahib. Indians saw this as mistreatment, led to the War of Independence, that their king, Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, was treated badly by the British. That's why the locals, they rose against the British in the form of the War of Independence. Then lack of opportunities for the native Indians in the civil services. The doors of the service were shut for the locals, and they were not allowed, as they were declared as the not really very much intelligent to look after the state affairs in the form of the civil service. So people thought that even being qualified, they were not given those jobs by the British, and those jobs were purely allocated for the British only. This led to the sort of resentment and hatred of the locals toward the British. This led to the war. Then in 1834, English replaced Persian as the official language in the offices of the subcontinent. So this was thought to be the another sort of attack on the local culture and local administrative system, that the official language of the subcontinent was changed from Persian to English. So the locals, they sought it, they thought it that this might be a sort of insult for them, that their language was disgraced and their language was kept aside. So this led to the war again. This created resentment because it was not only seen as cultural invasion but also increased Indian unemployment, as they did not know English. So when the English language was introduced in the offices, many of those locals who were communicating over there in the Persian language, or even in Hindi or in Urdu languages, they were to lose their jobs because of not knowing English, as the British had introduced English over there in those offices. So this created a sort of economic factor as well, that led to the unemployment factor. Now the military causes, and it was thought that this particular incident, the Greece Carthages incident, was really very important, as it was thought that the British were supplying the pigs Greece Carthages to the Muslims, and cows fats Carthages were to the Hindus. So in both cases, it was thought that that was the attack on the religious sentiments of the people, as the Muslims believe that the pig's fat was forbidden in Islam, so they would not be using those cartridges. And in the same way, cow's fat is forbidden in Hinduism, so the Hindu soldiers might not be consuming those cartridges to load their guns. So this created a greater sort of revolt, you may say, or a sort of resentment, or the uprising within the British army through the local soldiers, the Hindus and the Muslims. Officer rank was British only. The British, they never promoted the locals, Hindus or the Muslims, towards the officer ranks in the British army. So this was a sort of again a sort of issue for the local soldiers, that even they were performing really well for British, but still they were not getting the promotions towards the officers ranks. So they revolted, they got against them. So pay scales differed. I mean, when this of the same rank soldiers, the British, they were taking high salaries, but of the same rank, the locals, whether the Muslims or the Hindus, they were getting low salaries. So this created another sort of issue. This was a sort of you can say economic issue, financial issue as well, and as it was in the forces, that is why it is considered to be as in the military causes of the war. That in the same army, the British soldiers were getting higher salaries, and the locals, they were getting lower salaries. That was, you can say, a sort of discrimination. So soldiers feared that they might be forced to convert to Christianity, as there were the Christian missionaries who were also playing their role even within the army, not only in the civil sector. Loose caste did not want to fight in Afghanistan, as many of the people. When the British attacked Afghanistan, especially the Muslim soldiers in the British army, they refused to fight against their Muslim brothers over there in Afghanistan. So this brought a sort of split among the army over there. So this created an issue within the army, that the army was divided, and the Hindus and the British, they wanted to fight against the Afghans, but the Muslim soldiers of the same army, British army, they were reluctant to fight against their Muslim brothers. So this created a sort of divide among the army. This led to the revolt as well. Hindus did not want to leave their motherland. They did not want to go outside Hindustan and to attack Afghanistan on the orders of the British, and Muslims did not want to fight against their Muslim brothers in Afghanistan. So it means that the orders of the British went in vain, and the local soldiers, they you can say, went against the orders of the British. So this created a split, as I was saying, within the army, and a revolt began. Then there were certain religious and social problems, causes, you may say, resentment in the Indians due to the British culture, language, and way of life. As you know that their way of life, their dressing, their language, their overall culture was quite different from the culture, language, and the way of life of the locals over here in the subcontinent. So it means that that was a sort of conflict among the locals and the British. So this was on the cards that that might be going towards the War of Independence. The Indians were treated as the inferior race over here, as they were thought that they should be ruled by the British. So this created a sort of inferiority complex among the locals, that the lands were or the lands were of the locals, but they were ruled by the foreigners. So this was another issue. So next one, that is the educational reforms. The British opened many missionary schools over here, where the Christian missionaries, they were working as teachers, and they were spreading the Christianity over there, and they were trying their best to convert the locals, the Hindus and the Muslim kids, towards Christianity. So that was a greater sort of attack on the religious sectors of the subcontinent. This created another resentment over there, that the locals, they rose against the British. There were certain rumors over here in the subcontinent that the soldiers were forced to convert to Christianity within the army, and they were asked that if they would not convert to Christianity, they will be losing their jobs. So that was another big issue, that just because of the fear of not losing their jobs, the people started converting to Christianity, the Muslim Hindus. So that was a greater issue again. So sati was banned, and parda was ridiculed by the British. So sati was a Hindu practice, and the parda was, you can say that it is the a sort of obligation in Islam. So the British tried to overthrow both of these. So they banned sati, and they ridiculed the parda of the Muslim women. So that created again a greater sort of resentment among the people, that the British were intruding into their religious sort of acts. So the economic causes, the British imposed high taxes over there on the locals, and they were unable to pay those taxes. Peasants found it difficult to pay them, very especially the land workers, those who were working over there on the lands of the Hindu landlords. So they were unable to pay those high taxes. This created an economic issue, that they were not earning much out of those lands, but still they were asked to pay those taxes. That was a greater burden, financial burden on them. This led to the issue, and that led to the war. Low salaries of the sipais in army, as I already explained up over there in the military causes, that the locals, the Muslims, and the Hindus, or even Sikh or all other scheduled caste local British soldiers, they were paid less in comparison with the British soldiers. So they resented, and they were in a frame of mind that to go against. So British textiles fall in the standard and scale of the local goods. As you know that there was the industrial revolution over there in Britain, so they were bringing the better quality cloth over here in the subcontinent. They were taking raw cotton from here, they were processing it over there, bringing them the better quality cloth over here and selling into the local markets. But what happened that just because of this, the local goods, they people started buying the British goods and the local goods market declined, leading to the crash of the local trade and businesses. This led to the, you can say, the shutdown of the trade, the local trade. That was a greater issue as well. So, what we know that eventually this War of Independence failed, and the proclamation came in 1858 that East India Company was abolished and whole of the subcontinent went under the direct control of the British Crown. So that was, you can say, the reason that the War of Independence failed, and now we're going to find out the causes that why this War of Independence eventually failed. So the first reason of the failure of War of Independence was the lack of coordination, as there were those rebels. They were from different religions: Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, and even the local Christians wanted to get rid of the British. So they had no coordination among themselves. This led to the failure of the War of Independence. The lack of national leaders during the war was yet another reason for the war to fail, as no one was leading it. So it means that no one was over there to lead whole of the rebellion in different parts of the subcontinent. So it means that those rebels, they were trying their best at their own, and they had no coordination and could not communicate, and the need of reinforcement was also not fulfilled whenever required. So it means that in all those areas where rebels were getting certain grounds, no one was backing them up to move further forward. But in those areas where the rebels were being crushed by the British, still there was no backup force to have a counterattack on the British to gain that power again. But this in this way, whole of the strategy was nowhere. So that led to the failure. No general plan of action. Point number two, the rebels were fairly disorganized and therefore did not have contingency plans in case of actual plans failed. I mean, there was a plan to fight against, but there was no plan B or plan C or D, that if plan A fails, what would happen? What would we do? And if plan B fails, what would be the next step? If plan C fails, what would be the next one? So there was no actual plan over there to reinforce the whole of the war strategy over there. So it means that led to the failure. The war started and continued in an abrupt manner and even ended in a disorganized manner. I mean, no one was actually knowing that which areas are under war and who is performing how. So it means that it was just a abrupt sort of war. So uprising, Meerut, Bengal, the simultaneous uprising at the Bengal and Meerut cantonments, the military areas, caused problems for the rebels and forced them to divert their attention from the mainstream of war. So it means that, I mean, people were shifting from this to this area, this to this area. There was no real plan that how to organize the war in some particular region and how to fight it. So it means that it was not really very much well organized. British conquered Delhi. The British were very quick in responding to the attacks of the rebels and captured Delhi within few months of fighting. This was a major setback to the rebels, as the fall of Delhi was a psychological factor that helped the British to overpower the rebels, as the capital was now under the control of the British. Whenever the capital goes into the enemy's hands, definitely it is a setback in any sort of war, that the country or the land is captured by the enemy forces. So British strengths, that why the British were able to perform really well in that war. The British were experienced and had well equipped troops, unlike the rebels. Rebels were not really very much experienced, indisciplined, and lacking the modern equipment over there of that time when the British had. The level of discipline, organization, and planning for counterattacks was far better than the rebels and became a major difference between the two. British were having really very good war strategy and it paid off for them and they were the victorious. Diplomacy, bribery, and the communities to fight on one side with British were also some important reasons that caused the failure of the rebels in the War of Independence. So few local sort of soldiers, the Hindus and the Muslims, they were favoring British as well, and they were fighting from the British side, and they did not rebel. So this created a split even among the local communities, the Muslims and the Hindus. So the failure was on the cards, and this was done by the British really very effectively with the help of applying the factors of you can say diplomacy, bribery, and creating a split among the locals. So the technology and the modern warfare tactics also helped the British to overpower the rebels in such a small time. So they had modern weapons as they were having the industrial revolution over there, and they had started making the modern weapons over there in Europe. So they brought those to crush the rebellion. So that was a greater plus point for them that they were able to overthrow the rebellion over here in the subcontinent. So lack of unity, fighting for different objectives. The locals they did not have a common objective to get rid of the British over in the subcontinent. This led to the point that they were not united enough to get rid of the stronger forces of the British. Weak Mughal emperor had no concern for leading the war, so that was the factor. What we mostly say in Persian language that Hunuz Dilli Durast, so it was thought that the Delhi was still very, very far away from the British, but they were right at the entrance of Delhi. So no nationalism. The locals they were fighting for their own regions. The Sindhis and Punjabis and Bengalis and the Central Indians and the Northern Indians and the Southern Indians. They all were fighting for their own objectives. There was no national cause to liberate the land from the hands of the British. So, what were the causes that what happened afterwards? We will discuss the certain positive and negative causes of the consequences of the War of Independence. That what were the consequences after the war? The locals faced, whether in the form of good ones or in the form of bad ones, in the both ways. The British tried to bring about a change in their administration and policies as there was no East India Company anymore. Just after the war, when the British took over Delhi and the proclamation came in 1858, East India Company was abolished. So whatever the rules now came to the subcontinent, they started coming directly from the British Crown, from Queen. So the British tried to bring about a change in their administration policies. They ended the East India Company to the happiness of the Indians who were now relieved of the company's tyranny. Thus, they are now to be ruled through a new, possible, less cruel ruler. So it means that now there was no EIC as it was a company and company was really very much cruel for the locals. Now it was the British government. It was thought that now the locals might be having really very relaxed sort of rulers and having less sort of trouble for them over here in the subcontinent. New reforms and constitutional changes were introduced over here in the subcontinent. An act for the better government of India was passed and introduced. It involved a Secretary of State with a council of 15 members to help him. So it means that now there came the proper constitutional system, proper governance system over here in the subcontinent, which was nowhere before the War of Independence. So it means that now even before 1857, whole of the subcontinent was somehow under the control of the British without any constitutional or law-making rules. But after 1857, when the proclamation was signed in 1858, now the British government appointed a Secretary of State for India. So with the help of the 15, with a council of 15 members to help him to govern the state affairs. So you can say that now the subcontinent started moving towards the political system, towards the democratic system, rather than a kingdom or monarchy of the Mughal Empire. So policy of centralization in the 1833 and was changed, and new principles of decentralization and Indianization were reorganized, and Indians could now be elected in the provincial councils and thus attain power at the provincial levels. So that, as I explained, that the real sort of political systems started over here in the subcontinent, as it was nowhere during the Mughal Empire, as in the empire there is no politics. So when the British took over, they introduced that political system. So it means that the Indians, they were allowed to contest the elections and to be in the councils at the provincial levels. So in 1861, Act restored legislative powers to the government of Bombay and Madras. So, in these two provinces of India, the legislative powers of the local governments, that was restored with the help of this Act of 1861. This led to the locals to participate in the political system. Again, that was a positive sign. So new legislative councils were established across the subcontinent in many provinces, including Punjab and Bengal. Thus, Indians were given much more political say, which had been an aim of theirs in the War of Independence. They rebelled against the British over there in 1857, as they felt that their rights were not being given to them. But after the war, when the British introduced the legislative councils, and they were asked to put in their suggestions over there in those councils, so that they should be given their political rights. That was their demand before the 1857, and that was given after that. So it means that the legislative council's establishment was as per the will and wish of the people of the Indians over here in the subcontinent. So again, positive. The British policy of annexation was changed, and it was over. No more annexation. The Queen declared no more extension in the British Empire to their present territorial possessions. Also, the doctrine of lapse was abandoned, and Indians could now inherit ancestral lands with ease. So it means that no more grabbing of lands of those local Nawabs and Amirs by the British. So it means that there was no more doctrine of lapse. So this relieved the locals, that their lands, the local Nawabs, that their lands would not be taken over by the British anymore. So a plus point. The grease cottages supply stopped, as it was rumored that they were of pigs' fats and cows' fats. That was over, and now the Indians relieved of a very sensitive religious issue of both the Muslims and the Hindus. The Indians failed their main objective. Now we are talking about the negatives. Just because of this, I could not see that. Now we are talking about the negatives of the negative consequences of the War of Independence. The Indians had the main objective that they wanted to get rid of the British, but they were unable to, and even the whole of the subcontinent went further under the stronger control of the British, as the British government took over instead of East India Company. Now the Indians, they failed in their main objective of ending British rule. Driving them out of the subcontinent could not be done. They not only failed but ended as slaves to the British under the British government. The British attained complete autonomy over the country and established a rather tyrannical rule over the Indians. So it means that the dreams of the locals dashed down just because of the failure of the War of Independence. The Mughal Empire was removed from the Indian political scene forever, as the country came under the direct British crown in 1858 proclamation by Queen Victoria. So it means that no more Mughal Empire. The Muslims were greatly dismayed by this, as the main figure of Muslim authority was exiled. Bahadur Shah Zafar was exiled to Myanmar, at that time Burma, capital Rangoon, and he passed away over there in Rangoon, and even buried over there. The war left a trail of mutual fear and distrust in the minds of the rulers and the ruled. The British became cautious, rigid, reactionary in their attitude towards the Indians, especially the Muslims, as the British started thinking that they had grabbed the government from the hands of the Muslims. So they started feeling that the Muslims were their real enemies. So this created a greater sort of gap between the approaches of the Muslims and the British, considering them as the sole responsible for the revolt since they wanted to restore the Mughal Empire. Thus, the British began to develop a policy of suppressing the Muslims in their every walk of life. This hatred continued for about half a century. The army taking the initiative in the War of Independence was thoroughly revised. The number of European soldiers was increased, dismaying the Indians who took part in an attempt to gain better posts and salaries through the revolt. Instead, some soldiers became jobless and even they were killed over there. So the local soldiers, they were nowhere. I mean, they were replaced by the British soldiers, as the British they brought many of the British soldiers from Britain to have even stronger control over the subcontinent. Local soldiers were out of their jobs. They became jobless, and this was really again a sort of brutal act by the British. The forces that had rebelled were executed by the British. Cruel punishments were given, such as being blown to pieces by a cannon and by a cannon were used. The forces they the forces that had rebelled were executed by the British. As I told you that they were given the cruel punishments and even they were blown away in front of the cannon. So this is all about the War of Independence. We talked about the causes, and we talked about the reasons of failure, and we talked about the consequences, positive and negative consequences of the War of Independence. So this was our today's topic, and inshallah, we'll talk about the services of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan just after the War of Independence, that how he performed for the sake of building the image of the Muslims in the eyes of the British in our next lesson. Do not forget to subscribe, watch, like, share, and comment on my video. And inshallah, we will have a lesson on Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in our next lesson. Till then, Allah Hafiz.